get them.
I'm gonna step out for a little bit. It's a board meeting tonight, so I'm gonna run over there for that real quick. Yeah.
I guess what time is it? It's 6:08. We're gonna call the meeting to order. Miss Susan, would you do a roll call for us? Stephanie, okay, Miss Stephanie.
Froncel Burns,
Here.
Jonathan Bush,
Here.
Cassie Hollingston,
Here.
Camry Tharp, and Casey Whittle. All right, we have fun.
All right. First up on the agenda is the approval of the minutes.
March 24th.
I'll second.
All right, we have a motion by Jonathan Bush and then a second by Cassie. All in favor?
Aye.
Ayes have it. All right. Next up is the discussion items. Follow up and finish discussion of any previously discussed articles from the Home Rule Charter. Splat?
Sure. So, I think this afternoon, Gary sent us an updated copy of Articles 1 through 5 and Articles 10 through 11. Not sure that you all have them yet, but most of them over to you. Haven't already been sent. And so if between now and the next meeting, if you'll take a look at those, make any notes that you have, it should reflect what we've discussed to this point and have that for you. So if you'll take a look at those over the next couple of weeks, so we can be ready to discuss it in the next meeting.
And we'll see those two if our conflicts or empty.
And Gary, do you want to talk about what you included to the 11 and then we have?
Yes, a couple of things. First, notice the bunch of yellow highlighted. So as you look at the first 2 or 3 pages, table of contents, the yellow to begin there are all the sections we've already talked about. So those first 5 articles, that's what this graph includes. And then when you see green in it, the green is things we talked about. They've been moved from one part of the charter to another.
So they're still in there, but just
They're
moving.
still in there, but, and that's why they're green and not, but, well, they're green and they're not lined through, and they're green underlined.
Okay.
Then when you get to the back, for the first time, you can see a copy of Article 10, that 10 was utilities franchises, 11 was miscellaneous items. In the last 25 years, the original authority of cities to regulate franchise utilities like the natural gas company, the electric company, the telephone company, the cable company, all of those companies that provide services that require physical infrastructure in city-owned right-of-way. 25, 30 years ago, cities actually regulated. In the last 3 decades, first, the United States government got involved and took some of that, and then the state of Texas. So your city still deals with streets being torn up, those utilities every day, but your local ordinances depend upon what Texas state law and federal law says. Still have franchises with those utilities, they should still be paying you some money, but it's not a, once upon a time it was a franchise. We deal with cities, a lot of negotiation. Cities, a lot of cities got better deals than other cities. That's pretty much all leveled out. And now usually the federal government, the state government, like looking at all of the utilities customers as being voters and citizens, not from one city or another city that maybe had a better staff and can get a better deal. And so they kind of just spread things all out. So there's not much difference, there's not much ability for local cities to actually regulate franchises. And as a result, I'm suggesting to you, there's no need for a chapter 10 on franchises. Look at it, half of that chapter, I've just lined through. It's, you still regulate, you still work with those utilities, but not based upon what charters, based upon what state. You do have existing charters, so that is a contract, it is an entity that will continue to have at least for maybe another 10 or 15. But all of that really should just be moved up to powers of the city, powers of the city. And so that's why you see yellow that's lined through, that means I think that would just be continued. And then there's some green that's underlined, those have been moved to the. Yes.
What's with the what's that?
In doing our drafts with the person I'm working with, and also down with formatting and we just dropped out that section. The wording is, it's been moved up into section Article 2 or 3, so it's deleted and everything. I highlighted that yellow so that I would, on the next draft, fix that. And then when you get to the final one, Article 11, that was just a general catch-all, general provisions. That had a lot of duplication or, like we talked about before, triplication of things. So I tried to copy and paste all of those where they were already talked about earlier in the charter, and then just line them, just delete them from chapter 11. And then I went back through the last 2 weeks and prepared the 1, 2, sometimes 3 different places in the charter where there were paragraphs, sentences about the same thing, and try to harmonize those and say the same thing. Sometimes, one place might have said it better, or it might have been a paragraph or something. Put them all together, and then line 3 recommended deletion or duplication and moving on. So everything that's colored green or in that chapter 11, Article 11, excuse me, it's back, is now somewhere in Article 2 or 3. And it's also, it should have a different color, or it's got a yellow highlight that tells you. And when we go back through this, I'll specifically mention all the places. I know people are always concerned if you're deleting it over here, but if you're actually just moving it here, you're just really saying it better, making it easier to understand.
And I know you said this, but if you don't mind, tell me again why, the franchise part, just, I guess, tell me again why we're taking it out.
Why that-
The short version of,
The Federal Communications Commission, 40 years ago, decided they were going to regulate cable TV. When I first started practicing municipal law in the 70s, cities actually got called from citizens about the content of what was on television.
okay,
And cities regulated the cable company. The FCC didn't like that. They changed the rules. Cities still have a franchise with the cable companies, but you do not regulate them. You still get money from them, but the ability of the city of White House or any city to negotiate a better deal, to have like a public access channel or a free educational channel in schools, those are all things negotiated by individual cities decades ago. Now they just provide it as part of the federal. With gas and electric and telephone, it's a shared thing between the state of Texas and the federal. So there are the Texas agencies that Railroad Commission that regulates natural gas, has some regulation authority for the distribution of natural gas as well as oil wells. The Public Utility Commission is the place where you still have the city council. You'll sometimes get utility rate increase requests for electric or for gas. And you have groups of cities that join together to do that. And so it kind of seems like we cities still have authority to do that, but they're negotiating within a boundary line created by the Public Utility Commission of FCC.
Okay.
And so it's nearly all of that can be taken out. There still needs to be references that you do have the authority, so to speak, over right away. You do have the right to have a franchise, and so there'll be a couple of paragraphs, but I think they're easier to read if you just move them up to Article 2, where we're talking about the power of the city, the
Okay,
power of the city council. Article
okay,
Our regulatory authority is basically down to, and our negotiating power now means it's basically down to at most about 0.5%, maybe a whole percent of franchise fee percentages. And that's whether you exceed original jurisdiction or you don't. With the Public Utility Commission on some of those utilities, most of the time we cede original jurisdiction because I'm not going down to the PUC to testify on a rate increase or not.
Okay.
There are other organizations throughout the state that handle that. But that's really our only decision is to whether or not we want to have the capability to go down to the PUC if they're doing
mhm,
a rate increase or not. And if we say no, then we get an extra half, quarter, maybe 1%. I can't remember what we did with that. Atlas would be the one commission, but or center point. But that's really
that's
the
it.
only decision we have in our. And I think to Gary's point, the state legislature is going to continue to erode and chip away at even that power. There's there's a bill in front of the state legislature right now to require us to pay to move any of that infrastructure that's in our right of way if we want to widen our own road on our own property. So they keep chipping away at that, and so to Gary's point, there's no need to have any of this changing biannually, and our authority just
Keeps going.
continues to be.
Okay, that's what I was looking for. Okay,
Yeah, so if we want to widen a street and Encore has their poles on our property, we would have to pay to move them out.
Now, your council 30 years ago, no. Utilities.
okay.
We just lost those.
Sorry, just going through.
No, no, that's what I needed.
Well, this is an odd year. That means the Texas legislature is in session. And the Texas legislature for at least 2 decades has kind of felt like they're the voice and last hope of the people against both the evil federal government in Washington and the evil local government in Texas cities. That's how, as a municipal lawyer, that's been my practice, is facing that bias in. And that's what, some cities it makes it easier.
Yes.
You don't have any.
Sure, it's frustrating.
I don't think you can do that. You're the ones that have the streets that are messed up. This is where the traffic jams, but legislature uses it. All right, so then if we get back, I guess, to the 2 articles we have tonight, Article 6, Municipal Finance, and Article 7, Elections. That, I think, is a different, that's a different document than the one you just handed in. Do you,
It was sent last
Friday. Thursday, Friday?
Something just less. Does anybody need a copy?
I bought mine.
Nah.
I sent the agenda.
Oh, okay.
Do you want to? Does it show the changes?
Yes.
No, I brought mine.
So I might try to, just go through these, looking at the sections that are on the changes. And I'll try to just give you, I'll try to give you a short explanation, just change rather than explanation, unless you. So if you look at 6.02, the submission of the budget, the current charter is too detailed on the timing. That shouldn't be. State law regulates that. That's why you hire professional staff. There are calendars created by state agencies and cities because it's the tax law that drive the creation of that calendar, the need for public hearings. A city council, last thing you need is your city charter, giving you, on top of all of that, time limit restrictions on when you want to do a budget. Budget related decisions.
And it's
So
well before the first day of the 11th month of the fiscal year that we've done. So
that was kind of very unusual. If you're doing it that way, you have some issues.
What was the reason for it being that way? Just to have something?
I think probably at the time, the tax code and budget laws probably weren't nearly as specific and convoluted as they are now. Now it reads, you almost have to back into it on, you have to have a public hearing no less than 10 days prior to adoption, but no more than 30 days prior to publication. And then it's really much more complex than it probably was whenever that was in there. And it's stayed in there because we certainly do it on or before the first day of the 11th month. We do it usually about the end of July, first part of August. We follow with the city secretary.
It's possible that in the past, the city had a different fiscal year. Surprisingly, not all cities have January through December or October through September. They're global. Again, Texas had a lot of differences. So once upon a time, there were 12-year fiscal years. Then if any other, section 604, the budget is a public record and there's a hearing required. And then there's a separate section after that about notice of the public hearing on the budget. And I just thought those two things just go together. Just that section. The budget is a public record and you need to provide notice of a public hearing. Those are, whether you have those in your charter or not, the state law requires you to do that, plus common sense and get reelected by the council stuff. So, at least we can put them together and take out a few extra. Next one, public hearing on the budget. This is the same thing, combining two things. After you have the public hearing on the budget, then what do you do after that? Well, you have to adopt it and have it effective. And so there's nothing wrong with having these specific aids and details in the charter, as long as they don't conflict with state law, and as long as you understand that whatever they say, they have to always be. So if we're going to say them, let's just kind of combine them together, and you'll see the green is coming from somewhere else in the chart. So at least we put that in here. As we read through these, may be able to, as you have more than just a few minutes to look at them, you're looking at the final draft and the final plus final draft, we may be able to find some ways just to shorten things, because you come up with one same forces. Kind of like me, you ask for a short explanation and I give you a paragraph. But we're trying to do just sentences and less paragraphs.
And then you'll notice, going back up to what was 6.05, you got the reference to the official newspaper every biennial session of the state legislature right now. They're proposing bills to get rid of our requirement to publish in the newspaper. like taking it out. Good thing. We will continue to follow state laws as long as it requires us to publish it in the newspaper, but should that ever go away, that would save us a ton of money. Well, really, the tax rate notice is what's really expensive, but it would be helpful to take that out as newspapers continue to disappear.
One question about 6.06, first line says, as required by section 6.5.
Yeah. At the time and place set forth in the notice required by, you just take out required by. But then you still have, the time of the notice, time and place set forth in the notice, or any time in the notice of which such public hearing from time to time be adjourned, the city council shall hold. So when you read, if you're forced to actually read, sure, you really have this in.
So are you getting rid of all of 6.5 or just cause to?
No, just the part that's underlining. That's all I'm recommending now, but I am saying, I think as you read through this and have a chance to sleep on it, then read it a second for first time. You may think you can remove even.
So that first line of 606 just need to say as required by section 6.04.
It could, that's probably. As. These, actually, all of these 4 paragraphs, 4 whole sections are really giving you really detailed step-by-step explanation of what your staff is actually. Council really keeping a big word.
It's really expensive.
It's. I think I missed you. Title 608. This is, 2, 1, 2, 2.
Again, state that has to be on the 30th day of September. So, arbitrary. Necessary, needed.
These are ones where I think if, now that we're here and we're looking at it, it's a good opportunity for the city manager, staff, and finance director to look and what would you really like for this to say? What we could, I have really no doubt, we could probably just write one paragraph that would say that all of these sections, just describe what you're actually doing now, and then we just verify that that meets state law. Because this wording is, it's very old style, other charters. I just think there's a better way to,
You do need.
and I can come up with that if you want, but I really think this one is probably kind of help you a little better.
Well, if you don't, what was in here is what happened. You do need something in there. There are instances where it could be deadlocked on a vote to approve, particularly if some current state legislation that's being proposed passes and requires a supermajority for budget or tax rate adoption. And if you can't get that, there is a chance they may not adopt the budget. So you need something that would allow the city to continue to operate in that instance. But it is covered under state law, so whether that needs to be in the charter or not.
It's more of that same discussion you've been here. years ago, home rule cities in Texas had broad swaths of authority from the Constitution. And the legislature had not bothered to tell us, to help us by telling us how to do, how to thought. That literally is changing too. And the legislature's moving down. And so, there are, as you said, there need to be just more references to as required by state law. But then it's, again, as she mentioned, there are situations where cities just don't adopt a budget. So what do you do? And you have to do, the city doesn't stop because the council doesn't follow the law. Still have to provide services, you still have to do something. So these are sections that they're governed both by tradition, by practice, by some common sense, and by state law. And I think this would be an opportunity to just kind of spend some time on how you actually do the budget process here, and just kind of a summary. It might be what you actually explain to the council as you go through this
Yeah.
process. That might be a better thing to put in the charter about what the citizens expect the council to do before and during the process of it.
What I'm wondering is, would it be better if we said, city manager, finance director, whoever the appropriate person is, will submit a detailed budget calendar outlining all of the steps as required by state law for both the public and the council prior to any of the required steps in state law? I don't know how to word that. I think that's probably the most beneficial thing we can do.
And I also every year, that has to, they plan and begin the budget process earlier enough, because the legislature just making it look good. Maybe they're protecting all of us, but they're making it. And so you can read this charter, but every year you need to also go through whoever council is and make sure you have the latest version. And then you need to create a calendar that tells you all the dates, because depending upon what you think your tax rate's gonna wind up, notice it's different. I can't tell you what they are. Every year I have to go back and see what they are, and I look at a summary sheet that's prepared, and that's what your staff is having. So another way of saying that is, this is not actually something the city council's doing that. That's why you hired the staff to create a calendar, create a process that they said this year meets state law requirements, taxes, budgets. And then they're gonna present that. And so there certainly needs to be something in the charter that says that's an ultimate authority of the city council, but it's not a work task of the city council. Yours is to get something in front of it. And your task, I think, is to know that it's no longer just the city charter, it's the state law and the charter. And when the staff tells you how they're gonna go through the budget, what they're planning to do, what they think the financial needs are, what the taxes are, how many public hearings you're gonna have, how big the type set has to be, the font in the paper, which they do
Yes.
every year, because it does change. The council's job is also getting more difficult. You need to receive that, and if you can understand it, good. If you can read through it and understand it, good. But it's really the duty, the job of staff to create that process and explain it to you in a way that makes you comfortable that, okay, I understand what you're saying, and I believe you, I trust you that what you're saying is what the state law requires. Because if we write literally all the requirements on here, I'll just bring in the state laws, not these 8 sections of procedure.
Tax code, local government code,
No.
all the things, regulatory, all of that, and even they conflict, so.
Again, it's kind of,
The election code comes into play.
goes back to that very first discussion we had. Texas home rule cities are really new. Most cities in the United States 44, 45 in the United States don't have home use. They don't have a choice. The state tells them. Texas has always been different, and it's always like that. But the legislature is, we're just changing. Texas is changing.
So pretty much, Ms. Leslie and the staff need to say happens here.
They're gonna have to every year interpret the law and present a plan to you that they believe is in compliance with what the legislature did last session. Because there will be at least one change in the state law from this legislature that affects tax rates or budget dates, because there always is. That's what they do.
And so we do that by, can I give you some peace of mind? So our thoroughness on that. So we get about a 10 to 15 page document from the Texas Municipal League every year that says if you're a city under 30,000, here are all the steps and the key deadlines that you need to know for your process. And so we'll start at the bottom and say, okay, I think we're probably going to adopt a tax rate right here without any real knowledge of how much money that's going to bring in, because we don't get certified rolls until the end of July. But anyway, that's what's on the board.
Another great
Oh,
And we will go back into each of the states. So we create a Gantt chart, works backwards, and assigns each task on everything from, this is the date we need the item in the newspaper. So we have to back into, this is the date we have to send it to the newspaper to make sure it meets their deadline for publication on this date. They only publish on Tuesdays and Fridays, so we have to make sure we don't have it scheduled for a Wednesday. And so we will back into all of those, and it ends up being probably about 50 different steps to adopt our budget and tax rate every year. That's not even developing the budget, that's just the legal.
when do you start then?
Now,
March. So you start in March, and then, so by September 30th, it takes that long?
yes.
the last.
I guess I'm the only one surprised. I didn't know that.
As soon as the new started, part of their staff, that's why they have a bigger staff, is creating the drafts for next year. And you just have to put in blanks, because for some reason, the other government entity tells them how much your property is worth, so you're certified tax bill. You don't get that until this point in time, but you gotta start over here with your budget in order to meet this thing. They're just, the dates are based upon the way it was 50 years ago, but the rules aren't what they.
But do we have enough staff to, I mean, I guess you make it happen, but that's a lot.
We make it happen. Yeah, and Jennifer she will start keeping a list of budget needs before we ever adopt the budget for this year. Because you will adopt the budget in about mid-August. Well, by the time we hit October 1st, there are already things that we haven't thought. So she will keep a list for the next year.
And so at what point do you discuss what she's starting in October?
Usually April, May.
Okay.
So we like to get 6 months through the fiscal year and tell our department directors, take a look at where you are, and let me know where you expect to be for the end of the year. Do we have anything that we missed over time, like we talked about at the last meeting? It's one of those things that we'll need to adjust. And so we're already looking at that. It's like you do any other business, so you're always looking at it and seeing, are you performing where you thought you were? What adjustments do you need to make? How can we get there? Just have a few more regulatory steps to go through. Fishy.
Um, so, again, the next one is referring to the effective date, and making copies available, and this is a duplication. I'm just recommending that you can delete this. You already have a professional staff. They already know there's a Texas Open Records Act. It came in the late 1960s. Before that, you didn't, some cities didn't. They just told them what the number was. No, you can't see my budget. But since the 1960s, regardless of what your charge is, you have to give anybody that walks in a copy of whatever budget document your council adopted. And nothing wrong with it. I mean, but so I don't think you need to say that. Nowadays, no offense, you wouldn't get reelected if you wouldn't let people know who wanted to see you. It's just, I'm thinking you don't need that. It just makes it, it's something else you have to read and the wording doesn't actually match up. So if you leave wording in there, then the next time you do a charter amendment, you're gonna have to update it. But you could just take it out now, so you don't have to do it. Uh, the green here again is taken from another place in the charter. These are everything related, I thought, related to money, adopting the money and getting the money, spending the money. Probably ought to be in, if you have a charter article called finance, it probably ought to be in finance. Because if you put it in other places, it just seems like that's a way to kind of hide something. And a long time ago, people did that sometimes. Not today, hopefully. The next one, the budget establishes the amount to be raised by property taxes. So, oh my goodness, yes, and do you want to say that people need to pay their taxes in dollars? I don't know why this isn't. You know, probably if you said you wouldn't take Bitcoin, you'd get a lawsuit.
Let's not be that.
So go, yes, I think you can take that out. I, you, again, 40 years ago, when Texas cities really had a lot of home power, charters not only set forth what that power and authority was, but charters were educational aid to explain to people, hey, every 2,000 cities in Texas, this is what we do. So it was education and explaining. The problem is now this is archaic language, which you just don't need because I'm sorry, that's not how we do it. So I can change the words around and I could in every section say, as required by state, but I don't think that's what
And this was probably in there because there are some cities, I don't know many home rule cities, but there are some cities who are adamant about not having rates. So I can think of
we do have general law cities in Texas, and lots of unique cities.
Could be one of those.
It could be. Then there's a section that says, hey, if you have a budget, and you're spending money, you might want to have a reserve. I think that's a good idea. I'm not saying don't have a reserve. Hey, that's crazy words and give rid of your reserve. No, I'm saying, do you really want that in your chart? I mean, nowadays, I just don't think cities I don't think the function of the home rule city charter is to educate. Because if you really want to understand the power of the home rule cities in Texas now, you can't, I'm sorry, you can no longer just read your chart. You need to read the entire state law of Texas. Because it's, like, we codify Texas law based upon the subject matter. And cities are involved in virtually every subject matter of every text we have.
We have a reserve based on GASB, which is the Governmental Accounting Standards Board, there's Government Finance Officers Association, and your bond issuers require you to have money to issue debt, so.
And she mentioned bonds, so if you're using bonds, you have not only state law, but federal. So you literally have two layers of government agencies that sometimes cooperate with each other and sometimes sue each other, but they're both regulated. It is. Not just in finance, highways, everything.
Just, so,
Yes.
that's not mine.
All right, then there's more details, amendments after the adoption of a budget. Again, I guess I might take a moment here. I'm gonna talk about this also in the next article, the next two articles. In addition to another thought, just to kind of keep in mind as you're going through the chart. It might be that, given the way the law is now, with home rule cities increasingly having state laws telling them, that rather than putting some of these things in your city charter, it might be, I know it would be easier, and you might want to consider putting it in your city code, having the city council, giving the council the authority to adopt an ordinance that describes the budget process. Now, that would be based upon the process your staff uses and you're comfortable. But how you amend the budget, that can be in your charter, it's in your charter, but that could also just be an ordinance adopted by the city council that's part of the code. And I'm thinking nowadays that would be more efficient. It would give each council the authority to more easily change the budget process if for some reason you weren't comfortable with the process your staff chooses to adopt. But I didn't take all these out because that's really a whole other question. We don't want to, there's a limit how much you can do at once. Edicts shall not invalidate the tax levy. Agree with that? Whether you put it in here. Audits and examination of city books and accounts, you certainly need references in your charter to audits. Hopefully you're doing audits. The law requires it, common sense requires it, honesty and fairness required. And there are rules separate and apart from your charter that tell you how you're supposed to select. Then there's section 6.16. This is another one. All purchases made and contracts executed by the city of White House are made in accordance with the requirements of the Constitution and statutes of the state of Texas. Yep, that's true. I mean, I know of it, but you know, White House is part of Texas, so whether you choose to say you're going to pay them or not, you are required. And any of your citizens could sue you and sue you. So there's nothing wrong with putting it in there, except I'm suggesting by putting it in there, you're making the document longer, it's harder to read. And you really need to do that. I mean, if you read the charter the way I do, on every page, there's more than one sentence that says, there's already more than one sentence that says, in accordance with the law. Just over and over. So I'm thinking, man, I could make this shorter, 10% shorter, just by taking it on half of the references to, gosh, y'all need to obey the state law. And again, do you want the charter to be an educational tool to remind people that there are laws about purchase? You feel like you need to, in writing, tell the staff you're supposed to follow the rules when you buy stuff. But actually, when you put it in the charter, it's the public really telling the council, y'all need to follow this, because you're hiring the staff because they convinced you they know what the rules are and they. So these two, the power to tax, you certainly have the power to tax. This is probably the third time this charter says the city has the power to tax. So it's related to finance. I understand why somebody wanted to put it in finance. But it's already in the charter up in Article 2 or 3. So I highlighted these in yellow. You could take out even more, or you might say, you know, we're already taking out too much at the vote. We're going to try to create a revolution. Next, property subject to tax. All real and personal property within the city is subject to tax. Okay? You could say that in your charter, or you could take it out of the charter and have the council adopt it on. Put in your code if you feel like you need writing saying you have the power to tax. Then we have a couple more of these that I am recommending you take out. These are 3 references to the appraisal district. The in the 1970s, it's a long time ago, the laws in Texas changed. New charter did. When you adopted this charter in the 70s, the appraisal districts were created because there's a reference. But when we changed the way we tax in Texas in the 1970s and created appraisal districts for every county in Texas, all 250, we changed all the rules according not to White House, Tyler, or any other city. Legislature passed an entire set of rules, completely governs everything. So everything you have reference to the president, you need to make sure before you do what this says, that you make sure the legislature hasn't changed the law. So I would say, if you're thinking about appointing people to the appraisal district, if you get a question about how the appraisal district appraises what the appeal process is, City of White House has authority. So to me, this is kind of dangerous because somebody might read this. You might have a city employee who you wouldn't, but maybe just read this and say, oh, I'm going to do this without knowing your state law. I don't really think it had that time. So I just don't think it's there. They know they have to. And if you, your appraisal district, typically city councils really treasure the city council authority to appoint the members of the appraisal district. So if you appoint that board, well then that's your authority, not sections. You put those people up. Once you do, they have the authority to do what the state says. Can't restrict.
Gary, I'd have a question about 6.17 and 6.18. What, are they not saying the same thing essentially? The property subject to tax and power to tax?
You have the power to tax everything. This next one is, the first one said you have the authority to it, and then I think this one was intended to say, and by golly, we want to use it. So we are hereby telling the council they have the authority to tax it. But it's subject to tax. So again, do you need to tell the council they have them? The first one is saying you have the authority. The second one is saying, it is subject to taxation. It's kind of more like the people are telling the council we want you to do it. But then they put in, not expressly exempted by law. So again, take this one out yet, but
I was just curious, 'cause
I
they
think
seem like they're almost saying the same thing.
they are, and they're staying close enough that if you kept them, they should be. I did that in a couple ones. That probably just missed. Okay.
Yeah.
I also wanted to have this discussion to see, would you rather keep more, but kind of put them all together like the taxation, power and authority and duties of the city were as follows? This is just one section, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So you have one section where it's a lot easier. But then the last part is gonna say, as in accordance with state. So you could do that, or you could just even. At some point, we'll come back like this, the other paper document you got tonight, where you can see kind of the compilation of all the changes. And there's a lot that could be made. You're still gonna have a lot in your charter, but there really is a lot to take. So once we get through the whole process, then we get the whole package, and then you'll see what's been added, what's still there, what's lined through. And then we'll print another version that just has what's left, and then you can see how much, if any, shorter the new document. So this next one, taxes, 6.22, taxes due the city shall be payable. And the current thing says, at the office of the city or through an agent of the city of White House. So again, it's just more words than you need. You could just say, all taxes due the city shall be payable as designated by ordinance of the city council. You need to say, and the city council has the authority to designate city staff, or they can enter into a contract to have somebody. Well, you have that authority in everything. I don't know why they chose to say it on this one. Actually, yeah, in the 1970s, most cities stopped. When I first started practicing law, it was not that. My first job was collecting taxes. Nearly all cities had their own tax office. But no cities collect taxes because you can't charge, no city can collect fees for collecting taxes. So it's all contract. And most cities don't even allow you to pay for your taxes at city hall. You have to.
Yeah.
And it's really better for taxpayers. You go and can pay the school board, whatever, all the government entities we have, you pay them at one place. So all these things that once meant something, I don't know that we need to point out that the city council has the authority to enter these contracts or do things, because we've got a pretty good system that's working. That system's based on state law, that you just do an interlocal agreement with another government entity and they provide incentives. And this charter kind of, every time something else comes up, it's in a section that says you can do that for this, you can do that for this, you can do that for lakes, you can do that, you can do that for animals. Okay. And you don't need to do that. You've already said that the power of the city has the power. The city has all the powers. So most of the rest of the charter is, we would only leave it in here if you want to use it as an educational tool to just try and inform the public of all the multitude of things the city does. And I just don't know that a charter anymore is a good vehicle to do.
Yeah, I feel like people learn more, maybe, by other means. I mean,
What are the
Not
other
very-
meetings?
I mean, if they could go on to Google, they could look up the state law very easily. They could look up this charter online too, but I just feel like hardly anybody's gonna sit here and read through this
And-
document, maybe not like they would
In many
in the
cities-
eighties or the seventies. Yeah.
Or function,
Mm.
you know, questions about. But I'm thinking, even for me, a website, like educators need about what did he do? Because all cities don't all do the same thing. A lot of them, particularly in the metroplex and contract, this city does something for 6 cities. This city does something different for 6 cities. And so they would, I'll bet though all those cities have an amendment. Tax liens,
What was that?
I was gonna ask, do we have a word on it?
Yeah.
Goes on.
Mhm. Yeah, you can go there. It's in the code of ordinances. It's in the very beginning of it. Yeah, and I feel like if you're looking for like a quick snapshot of like what a city is doing and how they're operating, it's way quicker just to go to their website and look through their. Most people are not going to pull up their charter and start reading through a legal document to figure out what their city's doing, unless they're looking for something really specific, which they might. But realistically, as far as like educational purposes, I think it's probably not used for that anymore.
stat pages.
Yeah, that's fine. It's yours.
Next article is elections. And a few, line throughs in there. Several of these came from city staff. They're wanting to make the charter reflect what the city is doing. And elections is another area where, once upon a time, cities did their own election. But now, nearly all government contract with somebody, usually the county clerk, or many counties have a county election. Met County. And again, when I first moved to Iowa, 1980s, the first election I voted at, I had to go to 3 different places to vote, the city and county. And I was coming from a town where I had put all of those in one place. Stuck in the woods. But very soon, the county, the county became involved. It's just better for the vote, it's easier. So, again, so you do need a section about elections, you do that, but you also need to know that, well, city secretary, what do y'all actually do with it? Well, I guess the applicants have to file their paperwork with the city.
I'll have to get them bring back to us, be certified. And then they place the ballot. Should we have multiple people file for the one place? If we don't have people file for more than one person file for a place, then we're able to cancel.
Cancel it. State law allows you to do that.
So, drawing to see first on the ballot. Municipal elections are not bipartisan, so there's no reporting. So that, and we don't put incumbents necessarily first. We have a drawing. City's name goes first on the ballot. I get that information, we city county elections, so I get all the information to, that administrator. They, produce the ballot for us. They provide all the equipment, the workers, the places, all of that. We don't have to, do any of that anymore. When I first started here, that was a part of the city secretary's job. We had to get election workers, we had to produce the ballot, we had to have the equipment, and whatever other items that were required, we were still using paper ballots. We can't use paper ballots anymore. We have to have certain equipment and it has to be certified in it. it's a process, and I don't know what all that process is. I don't have to know what that process is because we just have to do it for this.
we have to pay for that?
Yes, we have to pay for it, but it is well worth. I don't know that we could buy one of the machines that's required now for what they charge us.
Oh, okay.
So
It's not cheaper.
Whole city. County, the county.
Resources, yeah.
And even if we have our election thing done, we're all still buying, so it should cost each of us less, and yet it should be more convenient.
because we only pay a portion of what the machine costs. And if, like for us, if on years where we don't have presidential elections and things like that, where it's just a smaller election, our difference is sometimes small. You know, because they don't have as many places as open, they have fewer elections, you know, places where you can go to cast your vote. So it all depends on who all is having an election and how big the county election is. That's usually the biggest thing. But we now even, at one point, probably 2 years ago, each city was still having to produce their own, you have to, again, we talked about notices for taxes and budget. They have to go in the newspaper and they have to be certain font, they have to be all this. Elections are the same way, and each city was posting their own, and for each, putting in almost the exact same information, and we charged hundreds of dollars for this. Well, now the county elections officer and I were talking about that. I said, why do we do that? Why can't we just all post one large one? It may be slightly higher cost, but when we pull it together, we're each gonna be paying a little bit less. So that, to Gary's point, we pull the resources in, it actually costs less to do it. So, yes, you have to post all those things in the newspaper. There's notices outside that have to be posted, there are deadlines for those things. So each city or each entity having an election has to do it. You have to. So,
So do you go to the city charter each time to find out what you need to do? Or do you go to a seminar and find out what the state law is? Because it's there, so you have to read it and try to organize it.
this is not what we do, state law is different than this. So if I were to follow this, I could be in trouble, I could be doing something illegal.
If you follow this?
If I follow this.
Because
Certain
it's
items,
updated.
because it's out of date.
Okay.
And it doesn't, if there was one, so not less than 45 days before the election. That's it's in the first one, the general election. Don't ask me what it is at the top of my head, but that is not state law. So if I followed that, I would be in conflict with state law that elections right now are very contentious, and city secretaries can go to jail. So I'm sorry.
So it's your responsibility to educate yourself on this like every year, every 2 years, or how? And then if you can't rely on this, why do we have to have this part in here? Or do you have to have a part in here about it, but
Well, that's, you're still a home rule city, so you still want to say, cities are responsible for elections. She's still doing a lot of work. It's just, we really are, it's gonna sound political, but we're just in a transition period. We still have home rule cities in Texas. Local people, not a state employee, not a county employee, are still working and doing jobs related to elections. But increasingly every 2 years when the legislature meets, the rules are becoming the same for every city in Texas. The rules for traffic speed, rules for water quality, the rules for elections, the rules for franchises. And so we're in a transition period where there are people alive today who needed a charter that said what cities can do and how to do it. But cities are still doing things, but we're just not doing them the way we used to do them. And the more you leave in your charter, the sooner you have to amend it. Even the line throughs in here, most of them in this article, are because Susan is saying, I've been ignoring that for years, so I stay on. So I've marked them all. But there's still other references in here that, to the extent they're different or beginning to be more different from state law, the legislature's got to be formalized. Step by step.
Similarly to the way Leslie said that we do our budget process, I take the election calendar every year and back into it. So I know when notices have to go out. I know when it is time for, if he wants to run, for those candidates to be able to file and to make sure I have the filing in the correct place, that I'm open up, past our normal working hours to accept those notices or those applications. To make sure that the election notice is posted in the newspaper that way. I have them posted out here on the front, on the posting boards. There's even a requirement now that is done like right about the same time as the election for the following election cycle. I have to go out and post what positions will be open and the process of filing that has to be posted on our website more than a year in advance.
Really?
Because the legislature thought that when we have an election for this time, we might want to tell people what the next one is and what's coming in. So that's a good idea, but the problem is, it's a good idea that the legislature. So they said, yeah, we'll make that a rule that a state agency isn't going to do that. It's going to be those 1,000+ city secretaries that all have to do. And so it may be better for the public, but it's more time and it's more work. And it's, you look at the charter, because as long as this is in your charter, she does need to be aware of this. But upon review, if this doesn't match what the election laws are next year, or this November, whenever the next election is, then you just ignore this. And city staff or professional staff all know that. They know they can't just read this again. They know they better talk to the manager, talk to the city attorney, make sure that this is.
State, it's a state kind of organization.
Association.
The Texas Municipal Clerks Association. And so they do seminars pretty much every year. But we try to go after state legislatures pass the law, so you get these latest. And there's other webinars you can go through. So it's a little bit of both to answer your question. Yes, you have to learn to educate yourself, but there are places that can help you.
Well, and that's pretty much, anything in local government, you're gonna constantly be having to watch the legislature, so it's just part of our jobs.
City attorneys and city managers go to the same meetings with the city secretary so that the local team can work. Attorneys that practice municipal law, along with experience, city secretaries are the ones that present the training. Or often it's the attorney or secretary or city manager of the city maybe didn't do it right, they got sued, so they were forced to figure out how to do it, so they're an expert. Share that.
Yeah, and to kind of answer your question about why it needs to be in there, I think we need to have something in there saying that we have the right to have an election, but the specifics in there that are lined through need to be taken out because of how frequently the state changes laws. And really, it's better for us to just refer to the state laws on that anyway, rather than trying to refer to this and then check this against the state laws. So if it's less specific, then we have the right to do an election, but we have to follow all the rules set for us to do that.
So you can see, specific references have been lined through, there's, sometimes the word will or shall is in there, and less, will or shall is a requirement. So sometimes we change a will or shall to may, and that's kind of a, to me, a sneaky one. It's not really sneaky, it just means, yeah, may do it, and that way we sometimes can leave something in there, but we know that. Because, or sometimes you know that the legislature is looking at this session, and I think they're gonna. Maybe they will, but if they don't this time. There was some wording in here that made it, in 703, wording, I think that was originally intended to try to be helpful, referring to the actual application form. So it can get kind of wordy. Is there a state form, a city form, county form? That's, the application is still what I think government entity. You have an application if somebody wants to run for a city in the White House.
State application. Those things, what's in here, that's what we're still doing.
Okay. So we now, again, in the quest to make the law, make it easier for people to run for office and elect people to control us, I guess you have to fill out two applications, a state application and a local. And that would be because the state didn't believe that local city applications included enough information. Because it wouldn't make sense to have two applications that ask for the same. So I remember back when we were talking about qualifications for city council, we had a discussion about, do we really want to have qualifications for White House city council that are different than qualifications for running for a state office? And you still can probably, but you're kind of making a target. It'd be a little more in some areas right now. But then the legislature meets it for two. I look at it from this long perspective, about 30 years, and I see a clear pattern. It's unstoppable. Okay, ballot election by majority. Conducting and canvassing. So lots of times people wonder, what's canvassing? Is that hiding all the votes in a canvas bag, or what? Why do we use the word canvassing? This is just my personal opinion. Because I always run into people who don't know what canvassing is. And it seems like a word that we used to. Yeah,
I don't know, is it counting,
it's counting. So why don't we just say count the vote? We have to canvass the vote. We take the votes to the city council, and the city council canvasses the election. They're accepting this because once upon a time, the council actually counted it. And then our staff, and we decided maybe we don't want elected officials. We decided maybe we don't actually want elected officials. So canvas is the process. It's not just a county. It's a fancy word to we're validating, verifying the election. And the main part of validating and verifying elections, who got it? So, but when you say canvassing, you give guys like me, a lawyer, an opportunity to sue you if, you know, I'm sure you'll canvass. I know this person did it, but you did. The council didn't have a motion in a second. They didn't have the actual calculation sheets in front of them. They had a summary sheet. So there's always a process, and what I'm saying is the process is subject to change. Sometimes, there's so many law changes that I myself found sometimes I wasn't aware of. Law change more than a couple of years. So whenever it's possible to make these simpler and more understandable.
So since they don't count them, would we say qualify or accept, certify?
That's really what they're doing, certifying, but I don't see if you use the word, canvas is still the socially, legally accepted word, so if you don't use the word canvas, right now, somebody's gonna say, oh, you didn't canvas the vote, you certified. You could have a lawsuit about this canvas.
So we need to keep
So-
canvas.
For next year.
Yeah, for now.
For now.
Okay.
But in addition to, from time to time, your city secretary and things like this, reading the law and talking to their attorney, remember there are also lawsuits where somebody is upset with what a city does, how you actually counted, or how you did, how you voted, and they sue cities. And sometimes that lawsuit results in a judgment about what the law means. The judge or the judge and jury interprets it. And so your staff also from time to time talks with their city attorney to make sure that their interpretation is in line with both the charter, state law, and the most recent lawsuit opinions that may also affect how a word like canvas is. Just gets moves on. Right. Still have an oath of office. Some places they don't administer oaths like you probably do here.
Really?
Yeah.
How do they pick up?
How do you swear? What words do you use when you swear? That's also in the process of change. Used to it was a Bible and
Yeah.
so help me God. And that's still used, but there are other phrases and methods that are also legally accepted. Plain and simple. If somebody challenges you on that, I just say,
We usually leave that up to the elected.
Yeah.
If you have. We will do it.
how do you?
You can affirm. You can affirm. That is weird.
Goal is to make us all think you mean what you say. Verbal contracts. All right. All right, that's those two. Just a minute. At our next meeting, we get to petition, initiative, and recall. Part of a charter where you're allowing the disgruntled or unusual voters an opportunity to challenge the people who got elected at the primary. An initiative is where somebody is not satisfied with an ordinance the council passed. They want you to unpass it. Or they want you to pass an ordinance that you won't pass. A recall is we think you got elected, but they elected the wrong person. And then a referendum is a version of those where they want to ask a question to get specific. And, catch with all of those is like in a referendum, like in a charter amendment, you have to ask a question, so there's only ask something where there's two ways of interpreting it. And this is also an area where city charters and Texas tradition have had a lot of information on this, because you can imagine this is something near and dear to the hearts of all of us and things, Texas. But it is also to the state law, also adding to.
Any questions on any of that? Like, and a little bit of information for you?
It's a lot. You didn't know you were taking a whole class. Holy.
Hey, but you're learning a lot, right?
All of you, thank you, volunteers.
Yeah.
Thank you for being here. Fun, it was-
Self-government's real interesting. It's complicated,
Self-government that is no longer self-government.
especially when it's, like a whole lot of rules.
Yeah.
Do we have anything else? If not, I will accept the motion to adjourn. We adjourn. We are adjourned at 7:29.
Thank you all very much.